Both inside and outside the ring, there are folks who are extremely charismatic, people who have the power to captivate the audience with just a smile. But, just like in real life, there are those who are synonymous of trouble, people who are extremely difficult to deal with, and in some cases, it is better to stay away from them. And that is exactly what we're going to talk about on today's video. We are going to talk about the wrestlers who are the most problematic off stage. But first, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the amazing videos we'll be releasing. Imagine the scene. A woman with no experience in professional wrestling enters WWE, the biggest wrestling promotion in the world, and within a few years becomes one of the most controversial figures in the company's history. This is the journey of Sable, one of WWE's biggest female stars in the 90s, but also one of the most disliked backstage figures. Sable arrived in WWE in 1996, initially just as the wife of Mark Miro, who had just signed a contract with the company. But fate had other plans for her. Despite never having trained in wrestling, Sable quickly captivated the audience with her charisma and presence. When Mark Miro suffered an injury in 1997, Sable started to appear solo on shows, and even without wrestling, she was stealing the spotlight. Imagine the backstage pressure, a rookie who didn't even step into the ring overshadowing experienced wrestlers. When Miro returned, the storyline took an even more dramatic turn. Miro's character began to show jealousy of Sable's success, reflecting what supposedly happened in real life. Eventually, Sable separated from Miro in the storyline, began to wrestle, or at least try, and became a phenomenon. Despite her lacking in-ring skills, WWE pushed her to the top, culminating in her victory over Jacqueline at Survivor Series 1998 to become women's champion. But that's when things started to sour. Sable had an impressive 176-day reign as champion, something rare at the time, but backstage, the atmosphere was tense. Many colleagues saw her as someone who didn't have a passion for wrestling, but still received all the attention. She wasn't exactly a darling in the locker room. Her lack of experience and commitment to the sport annoyed many. When she lost the title in 1999, Sable mysteriously disappeared from TV. Then came the bombshell. Sable sued WWE for $110 million, accusing the company of harassment and unsafe working conditions. And let's be honest, anyone who's seen her segments with Vince McMahon knows this didn't seem all that far-fetched. The lawsuit was a scandal, but was eventually settled out of court. Sable's WWE career seemed to be over for good. But wrestling is a world full of surprises, and in 2003, Sable shocked everyone by returning to WWE despite everything that had happened. This time, her stint was smoother and lasted about a year and a half. She left the company in 2004, this time amicably, to focus on her family. So what do you think? Was Sable an unjustly mistreated pioneer, or someone who went too far without earning it? Matt Riddle was a promising talent in MMA before entering the world of wrestling. With a career marked by wins and losses, he became a polarizing figure in the UFC, but his story in WWE would prove even more tumultuous, filled with highs and lows that reflected not only his potential, but also the controversies surrounding his personal life. Those who follow wrestling know that talent in the ring isn't the only factor for success, and Matt Riddle ultimately paid a high price for this. Riddle made his UFC debut in 2008 after participating in The Ultimate Fighter, but his rise in MMA was marked by a series of ups and downs. In 2013, after testing positive for marijuana, he was released from the UFC, ending a promising career. But as many know, when one door closes, another opens, and Matt quickly transitioned to wrestling, where his journey would only get more complicated. The transition from MMA to wrestling isn't easy, and it's interesting to think that Riddle found his place in this new universe, despite his messy history. Upon entering wrestling, Riddle began his career at the Monster Factory, and quickly started gaining recognition. A winner of the Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic alongside Pete Dunne, he seemed ready to shine. However, a series of misfortunes began to emerge, especially when the COVID-19 pandemic affected his partnership with Dunne, and he had to replace his tag partner with Timothy Thatcher. It was a tough phase, but Riddle remained resilient and soon found his way to WWE's main roster. If you thought this would be the turning point in his career, I'm afraid the story was just getting even more unpredictable. On Raw, he got involved in prominent rivalries, but what really caught everyone's attention was his story with Randy Orton. At first, Orton didn't want to team up with Riddle, but after a few matches, the two ended up forming the popular Arcade Bro. With big tag team victories, like at SummerSlam 2021, it seemed like Riddle was finally finding his place in WWE. But as many know, things are not always what they seem. The chemistry between Riddle and Orton led everyone to believe he had finally cemented his spot. But WWE's backstage environment was about to turn into a stage for complications. The scandal involving Matt Riddle was not something that went unnoticed. During the 2020 Speaking Out movement, Riddle faced very serious allegations, and although he vehemently denied the accusations, the impact on his backstage relationships in WWE was undeniable. The situation became even more complicated in 2021 when an accuser filed a lawsuit against him, WWE and Gabe Sapolsky. While the lawsuit was later dismissed, Riddle's image continued to suffer. Of course, when it comes to controversies like this, a wrestler's reputation can be permanently damaged, even if the accusations are later dropped. For many, the shadow of the scandal never left his career. When Riddle finally won the United States title at the Elimination Chamber in 2021, it seemed like he could be on top. But as we all know, title reigns in WWE are volatile. His brief victory and subsequent loss to Sheamus at WrestleMania 2021 marked the beginning of a cycle of ups and downs in his career, with several rivalries and status drops. It was as if Riddle's fate had been sealed by his own mistakes outside the ring. His talent was unquestionable, but the ghosts of the past followed him throughout his journey. The lowest point of his WWE career came in 2022 when he was suspended for 60 days after failing a drug test. Riddle, who had already been struggling with his image since previous scandals, saw his career sink even further. From that point on, he had a series of rivalries with little impact, until in September 2023, it was announced that he was leaving WWE. It's a shame to see what seemed like a promising career unravel due to personal failures. But at some point, it became clear that Riddle was no longer focused on his career, but rather on his internal struggle. When we look at Matt Riddle's journey, it's impossible not to think of the missed opportunities and what he could have achieved without the offering issues. He had plenty of talent, but WWE doesn't forgive even the best when their actions start to affect the product. Could Matt Riddle have been one of WWE's biggest stars? Maybe, but in the end, he turned out to be a big question mark. Someone loved by his fans, but also hated backstage. Bill DeMott, a name that many wrestling fans recognize, had a long journey in the ring, but it wasn't exactly a smooth one, especially when it came to his backstage image. Let's start from the beginning, and perhaps we can better understand why his career became marked by controversies and accusations, even after so many years in the WWE world. He made his first big appearances in wrestling as part of WCW from 1995 until the company was bought by WWE in 2001. During that time, Bill had some success, winning the United States Championship twice in WCW. Nothing too extraordinary, but enough to gain some recognition in the industry. Now when he joined WWE in 2001, his career took a bit of a different turn. It's interesting how some names shine at the beginning, but then end up relegated to roles far beneath what they could have achieved, isn't it? In WWE, Bill was largely used as a jobber, the classic wrestler who loses to help elevate others. He was given various names such as Hugh Morris, General Reaction, and of course, the name most people know him by, Bill DeMott. His backstage work was essentially to do the dirty work for other, more important wrestlers, but without the recognition he felt he deserved. I imagine being a jobber must be a thankless task. You get into the ring, lose humiliatingly, and don't always get credit, but you're there to make room for others to grow. It must be tough. In 2007, DeMott left WWE and began exploring independent circuits, in addition to opening his own wrestling school. It seemed like his calling might be in teaching others, but in 2011, he returned to WWE as a trainer. This seemed to be the peak of his career, where he became the head of the Tough Enough program and was directly involved in developing new talents at FCW and NXT, WWE's training grounds. However, his journey as a trainer wouldn't be as smooth as it seemed. It appears that no matter how hard he tried to take a quieter, low-profile path, problems continued to arise, didn't they? In 2015, a series of accusations against Bill DeMott surfaced. Former trainees from FCW, NXT, and Deep South Wrestling began to come forward with allegations of mistreatment during their time under his tutelage. The accusations were serious and varied, including sexual harassment, the use of racist and homophobic slurs, and other extremely questionable practices such as forcing trainees to work out naked and allowing them to engage in dangerous activities without precautions. Among the names who accused Bill were figures who would later have successful wrestling careers, such as Luchasaurus, EC3, Simon Dean, and even Kenny Omega. I'm genuinely shocked that figures who, for the most part, went on to build successful careers had to go through such experiences. This is a very dark window into the wrestling world backstage, where trainers were supposed to be mentors. But in reality, not everyone filled that role as they should. The hashtag #FireBillDeo quickly became trending on Twitter. And on March 6, 2015, Bill Dio publicly responded to the allegations, denying everything, but announced his resignation from WWE. He claimed that he didn't want to harm the company's reputation, although his departure was clearly a blow to his image. This part really makes me think he knew that the accusations could harm not just him, but WWE as well. So he chose to leave on his own terms, rather than being forced out. But in the end, the stain on his image would be hard to erase. Since then, Bill Dio has stayed away from wrestling, and his career was abruptly cut short. He hasn't been involved with the industry, and in fact, there have been few mentions of his name since his departure. Jackson Ryker's story is undoubtedly one of the most talked about. Born Phil Shatter on June 6, 1982, he had a journey marked by highs and lows in professional wrestling, but also by actions and statements that caused serious issues with his colleagues. Ryker began his career on the independent scene, initially known as Shatter and later as Phil Shatter. During the 2000s, he made a name for himself in Georgia and the Carolinas promotions, winning important titles and gaining notoriety, especially for his 2-year reign as NWA National Champion, an impressive feat. But what followed in TNA and later in WWE reveals a less admired side. In TNA, under the name Gunner, he started as security alongside Murphy, but soon joined the Immortal Stable under Hulk Hogan's leadership. I've always found it curious how some wrestlers start in such peripheral roles, but suddenly gain prominence just by being in the right place at the right time. Gunner had some notable victories, such as winning the TNA TV title, but that didn't make him truly shine as many expected. He spent most of his time wrestling in insignificant matches until the Immortal group disbanded, taking his relevance with it. It was in NXT, under the name Jackson Ryker, that his story began to complicate even further. He and the Forgotten Sons, a trio formed by him, Wesley Blake, and Steve Cutler, couldn't stand out among other stables like the Undisputed Era, which dominated the heel scene. This marks a point of reflection on how WWE sometimes pushes certain talents without really knowing how to use them effectively. Ryker could have been much more, but WWE never seemed to have a clear idea for his character. When the Forgotten Sons were finally called up to the main SmackDown roster, it seemed like a new phase was beginning. But as we can see, what seemed like a golden opportunity turned into a nightmare for Jackson Ryker. In June 2020, Ryker posted a controversial tweet supporting then-President Donald Trump amidst the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement. The reaction was immediate and devastating. There's no denying that politics has a huge impact behind the scenes in wrestling, and some people simply don't know when to keep quiet. The response from other wrestlers was brutal, with figures like Mustafa Ali, Kevin Owens, and even Batista openly criticizing his words. The tension was so great that within weeks, the Forgotten Sons were pulled from WWE programming, and Ryker became looked down upon by many of his colleagues. With the Forgotten Sons disbanded and his public image seriously damaged, Jackson Ryker tried to move on, aligning himself with Elias in one of the most random alliances in WWE's recent history. Seriously, what was the logic behind this partnership? Ryker was practically directionless in the company, and putting him in a feud with Elias seemed like a desperate attempt to give him something to do. But as expected, this storyline led nowhere, and Ryker ended the rivalry losing to Elias in a few irrelevant matches. After that, he continued on Main Event, one of WWE's most forgotten divisions, where wrestlers are sidelined with little spotlight. Sometimes, Main Event seems more like a way to end careers than anything truly significant. And finally, after losing to Karrion Kross and disappearing from television, Ryker was released by WWE in November 2021. However, Ryker's story doesn't end there. Although he returned to the independent scene, his wrestling career seems to be coming to a close. he announced that 2024 will be his final year in the ring, with a retirement fight made in August 2024. Perhaps, in the end, Ryker became more famous for his mistakes outside the ring than for what he did inside it. It's a shame, because he seemed to have a lot of potential. This is one of the stories of how a simple opinion can destroy a career in WWE. I keep wondering how his trajectory might have been if he had stayed more focused on his work in the ring without getting involved in controversies. Perhaps he was a victim of circumstances. Enzo Amore is undoubtedly one of the most controversial figures in recent WWE history. His journey to the company feels like a comedy film script, something that could only be played by him. When you think of Enzo, what comes to mind? The sharp microphone skills, the explosive personality, and the catchphrases that marked a generation of fans. The story of how he got to WWE is nothing short of Enzo Amore. It's like one of those episodes of doing everything wrong, but still making it work. He was discovered by Triple H thanks to a video one of his trainers showed, where Enzo was cutting a promo while training. This is the definition of someone who knows how to steal the show, even in the most unlikely moments. He wasn't the typical WWE project with intense training and performance development. He was discovered for his microphone skills, something rare to see. His start in NXT was typical of someone trying to find their place. He was the arrogant Jersey loudmouth, as he called himself, and his early appearances were far from memorable. He got beaten down by practically everyone, from Mason Ryan to Alundra Blaze, but this only helped his character grow. He teamed up with Big Cass, and that's when things started to get interesting. Enzo and Cass together became one of the most charismatic duos in NXT. If there's one thing Enzo knew how to do, it was connect with the audience. And that's something WWE doesn't always succeed at, no matter how hard they try. By 2015, Enzo's popularity skyrocketed, especially with his promos immortalized by lines like, "My name is Enzo Amore, and I'm a certified G and a bona fide stud, and you can't teach that." The guy really knew how to make the audience love or hate him at any given moment. But as WWE often does with its stars, the story didn't always end how we expected. When Enzo and Cass moved to the main roster after WrestleMania 32, the crowd's response was deafening, but the impact quickly cooled off. They continued to appear in big matches, like against the Club and even Jericho. But what about the tag titles? Well, that seemed to get put aside. It seemed WWE was more interested in other options, and guys like Enzo, despite being popular, were left in the shadow of what could have been. That's when things started to go wrong. In 2017, Enzo had that infamous Backstage incident where Cass attacked him, which was a strange shift, to be honest. If I were to write a script for Tag Team, I definitely wouldn't have put that disagreement in the middle. But anyway, the split between the two was the start of a turbulent phase in Enzo's career. The move to the Cruiserweight division seemed promising, but like everything in his career, it had the bitter taste of another missed opportunity. WWE put Enzo as the Cruiserweight champion, hoping to save 205 Live. But trust me, the guy wasn't exactly getting applause backstage. He was seen as too big for his boots, and it didn't take long for him to get involved in controversies outside the ring. Enzo was soon fired from WWE after an investigation into allegations of sexual harassment. I really can't help but think about how bad the timing was, right when he was in the spotlight as champion. The allegation led to a suspension and, shortly after, his dismissal, which marked the end of his WWE run. After his departure, he tried to move on with some music, but, well, to be honest, they were a complete disaster. He also had a pretty strange moment when he crashed Survivor Series 2018, shouting his catchphrases in the middle of a match. That was Enzo at his peak craziness. Enzo still tries his luck in the independent scene and even teamed up with Big Cass again. While WWE has distanced itself from Enzo Amore, he remains a polarizing figure, with a legacy that is both loved and hated. So, what's the lesson here? Enzo Amore was one of WWE's most unpredictable stars. With the charisma he had, he could have been so much more than what he became. In the end, it doesn't matter how much you shine in the ring or on the microphone. If you can't handle the backstage, the road becomes much harder. Austin Aries has always been a controversial figure in the world of wrestling, with a career marked by both incredible achievements and problematic attitudes that, over the years, have affected his career in unpredictable ways. Let's start from the beginning. He began his wrestling journey in 2000, and by 2004 was dazzling in Ring of Honor. He made history by defeating Samoa Joe to win the world title, a feat that placed him under the spotlight of the independent wrestling scene. But as with many other success stories in wrestling, the first signs of trouble soon appeared. In 2005, when he debuted in TNA, things seemed to be going well, until in 2006, a simple decision to ignore a request from the company resulted in a suspension. Aries and his longtime partner, Roderick Strong, arrived 4 hours late to an important pay-per-view. They were at another event in Long Island, and despite being warned about the snowstorm and the need to leave earlier for Tampa, they decided to ignore it and stick to their own plan. This attitude was not well received by TNA management, who did not hesitate to punish them. Here's where my reflection starts. At the same time you have to admire the independence and the will to do what you think is right, it's impossible to ignore how this type of behavior affects a career. In wrestling, as in any other profession, trust and professionalism are key. Aries started to stand out in the X division, but his attitude and the way he handled critical situations often generated controversy. A classic example was the suspension in 2007, when TNA asked him to film something on his day off. Aries agreed, but didn't react well when the company was dissatisfied with his demeanor. He was suspended for 90 days, and upon his return he decided to focus more on Ring of Honor, which marked a real turning point in his career. In 2011, Aries made a triumphant return to TNA, but even with a legendary reign in the X division, the problems with his attitude continued. Not long after becoming world champion, there was the incident with Christy Hemme, which created a huge backstage controversy. In a botched introduction, Aries reacted aggressively, climbing the ropes and taunting the announcer. He was fined, but the incident made it clear that Aries' behavior didn't always sit well with everyone backstage. It's fascinating how arrogance and confidence can both drive and destroy a wrestling career. It seems Aries had that delicate balance, where his exceptional skills in the ring were overshadowed by his attitude, which often left much to be desired. When he arrived in WWE in 2016, it seemed like the grandest chapter was yet to come. But soon, his WWE career was cut short. After a series of cruiserweight title challenges and some disagreements, his surprise departure caught everyone off guard. The reason? His attitude once again didn't sit well with Backstage. And here's the reflection I make. Wrestling, above all, is a show, and the ability to work well with others is crucial. Aries, as talented as he was, failed in one fundamental area. Even though he was recognized for his in-ring ability, his backstage attitude was a constant issue. His return to TNA in 2018 and his rivalry with Johnny Impact could have been the triumphant return of his career, but once again, his attitude led to an infamous incident where he completely ignored the end of his match and walked out of the ring. No one knows to this day what really happened, but the fact is that Aries' behavior left a sour taste for everyone involved. The impact of his backstage attitude was so significant that, in 2020, he faced serious accusations, with several women alleging predatory behavior. Aries defended himself, saying that the Austin Aries character didn't reflect who he was as a person, but the stain on his career had already been made. I wonder, how can someone with so much talent sink so low for so little? Wrestling is full of egos, but in the end, teamwork is what takes wrestlers further. Aries had the potential to be a wrestling legend, but his lack of social skills and his arrogant demeanor backstage prevented him from achieving the success his talent deserved. Today, Austin Aries is far from the spotlight, competing in smaller promotions and struggling to maintain his relevance. His name is still remembered, but more for his mistakes than his victories. Low-key made his wrestling debut in 1998, starting his journey in the independent promotions of New Jersey and New York. And it seems he's always been an intense guy, both inside and outside the ring. I can't help but imagine what it would be like to be a promoter trying to deal with him backstage. Someone like Loki. You never know if he's gonna break the ring or your patience. His in-ring ability soon stood out and he made some appearances in the WWF, wrestling as a jobber, the guy who typically loses to put other talent over. But shortly after, he began his rise, which would place him among the most recognized names outside of WWE. In 2001, he shined in the All-Pro Wrestling King of the Indies tournament, finishing second after losing to none other than the legendary American Dragon, Daniel Bryan. And in 2002, he was one of the founding stars of Ring of Honor, ROH, one of the biggest stages for independent wrestling, where he made a name for himself in memorable bouts. Loki was the kind of guy who made sure people remembered him wherever he went, and not always in a positive way. He knew how to make history, but not without leaving a trail of controversy along the way. But that's where the story starts to get complicated, as it always does with him. In 2004, after an incident with TNA and ROH, he chose to stay in TNA, but would soon return to ROH. Over the years, he became known not just for his aggressive style, but for his complicated attitude. Loki wasn't just a hardcore wrestler in the ring, he had a mindset that was hard for any promoter to swallow. He was a nightmare for bookers, like a mark for himself. He simply wouldn't accept any direction or outcome in his career, and well, that caused problems. He wasn't afraid to refuse to lose to other wrestlers, like he did with Claudio Castagnoli in PWG, where he refused to let Castagnoli win. Imagine the backstage tension that created. If you think backstage politics in wrestling is tough, try being the guy who always wants to be on top but doesn't want to collaborate. Loki's attitude was undoubtedly a burden to those around him. In 2009, WWE, with all its internal challenges, ended up signing Loki. His golden opportunity arrived. He went to FCW, WWE's testing ground, and soon entered NXT, the competition show that resembled a reality show, where he became Cavall. Despite having great talent and a unique style, his time in WWE was marked by a huge waste of potential. I never understood why WWE couldn't make the most of what he could offer. The logic seemed to be, okay, we've got a great wrestler, let's bury him. He was sidelined, treated like a jobber, and ultimately, that led to his quick exit from WWE in 2010. But Loki's story didn't end there. He continued his career in Japan, where he had his moment of glory with New Japan Pro Wrestling, winning the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title. However, upon returning to the US independent circuit, he couldn't escape the controversies. In 2012, during his debut with Evolve, he knocked out his opponent for real, proving that even his debuts were explosively unpredictable. Now, if you think Loki would be the type of guy to retire without causing more turbulence, think again. In 2014, he returned to TNA and joined the Beatdown Clan, but his run was brief, just like many of his returns to wrestling. This makes me wonder, did he really want to continue, or had wrestling become a battleground where he only knew how to lose and cause chaos? Currently, at 44 years old, Loki wrestles sporadically, but he will hardly reach the same level of success he had in his prime. He is a clear example of how talent can be wasted if a person doesn't know how to handle their own image in the backstage politics. As I've mentioned in other videos, you can be amazing in the ring, but if you're impossible to work with backstage, no one will want to hire you for long. Looking at Loki's career, I see him as another lesson on what happens when someone gets lost in their own beliefs and attitudes. He's like an Austin Aries, someone with huge potential, but who always fought against himself, making the path harder than it already is in the wrestling world. If you go digging into the stories and interviews about Loki, you'll realize he's one of the most infamous and interesting cases in wrestling. But in the end, maybe Loki's greatest trick was staying relevant. Not for what he did in the ring, but for the stories he left behind along the way. When Ryan Reeves, better known as Ryback, first appeared in WWE, many expected him to become a major star. He was introduced on the 2004 season of Tough Enough, a WWE talent reality show, but he didn't win. However, WWE saw something in him and, despite not winning, signed him to a developmental contract. It's impressive how WWE has the power to turn people into stars, even when they're not the most obvious choices, isn't it? After spending time in Deep South Wrestling and OVW, Ryback finally found his footing as Skip Sheffield during a new phase in FCW. He made his NXT debut in 2010, in a season that was quite different from today's competition. While he didn't stand out on the show, Skip, along with other competitors, became memorable for the attack on John Cena and CM Punk on the June 2010 episode of Raw, during the infamous Nexus arrival. Oh, the Nexus! It seemed like this was Skip's chance to stand out, but WWE didn't capitalize on the moment the right way. The problem with Nexus was that despite all the build-up, they lost to WWE at SummerSlam that same year, which caused the group to lose all the credibility they had built. Not to mention Ryback's injury, which kept him out of action for a long time. But Ryback's story was far from over. When he returned in 2012, he came back with a new identity. Ryback, the unstoppable force. He hit the ground running, starting his famous squash matches and being compared to Goldberg, which helped elevate his popularity. In 2012, he was booked to challenge CM Punk for the WWE Championship. Who would have thought that Ryback, a name that had been somewhat unknown, would come so close to becoming the company's top champion? The crowd was eager to see him win, but WWE wasn't ready to give him the title, and Ryback had to deal with one of the most frustrating endings of his career, with referee Brad Maddox helping Punk retain the belt. This undoubtedly broke the momentum surrounding him, but Ryback stayed in the fight. Ryback went on to participate in several key rivalries, including with The Shield, and even with John Cena, but always coming up short. This took a toll on him, and the character that had been on the rise began to lose steam. His WrestleMania debut also wasn't favorable. He lost to Mark Henry in a match that did nothing for his career, which only reinforced the feeling that Ryback was at a dead end. I don't know about you, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he had won that match and taken a different path. After turning the heel for the first time, Ryback had a chance to challenge Cena in 2013, but the truth is, he was starting to be sidelined, with no clear direction for his career. This lack of direction led him into a difficult period. He was paired with Curtis Axel as part of the Paul Heyman guys, but the partnership didn't work out. To make matters worse, during a feud with CM Punk, Punk himself made it clear he didn't like working with Ryback, calling him an idiot backstage. Imagine how tough it must be when you're trying to please and still face that kind of pressure from your peers. In 2014, after undergoing hernia surgery, Ryback made his return, but WWE didn't immediately push him to the top. Still, he had a good moment at Survivor Series, helping Team WWE defeat Team Authority. Finally, in 2015, Ryback won his first WWE title, the Intercontinental Championship, by defeating others in the Elimination Chamber. However, his reign was short-lived, and he lost the title to Kevin Owens. Here's the thing, Ryback had several good moments, but it always seemed like he was the almost guy for something bigger, didn't it? In 2016, Ryback began distancing himself further from his heroic image by adopting a heel persona and engaging in a rivalry with Kalisto for the US Championship. Unfortunately, he couldn't turn things around and lost again. By the end of April, Ryback had a major dispute with WWE, mainly over salary and creative dissatisfaction. In May 2016, he was released from the company, and from there, his post-WWE career took questionable turns, especially with his social media posts. He went from a major name to something of a joke on Twitter, with bizarre statements, including that infamous tweet about retiring. That tweet would become Ryback's most remembered legacy in WWE, a tragic irony, considering he was so close to becoming one of the biggest names in modern wrestling. From rising star to someone fans no longer wanted to see in the ring, it's a clear example of how wrestling and fame can be fickle. Ryback stepped away from wrestling in 2018, and today, few remember him as a real threat to the top of WWE, but who knows, Billy Corgan, president of the NWA, might have a title shot waiting for him. Or maybe Ryback just really wants to retire, with his ego bruised to the point where he insists everyone knows. What do you think? Is there still a future for Ryback outside of WWE? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with your friends. See you in the next one.